Meet Gilbert. For the last 5 months, Gilbert's been sitting on a shelf behind my desk, quietly recycling my carbon dioxide as I check emails and take endless Zoom calls. Neither of us need much sunlight or food, so we're a great team. Sadly though, Gilbert lives in this, a flimsy, dirty plastic pot. But today, that's gonna change. This is Gamey Builds, and we're pulling out all the stops for Extreme Home Makeover Trading Vases. First off, we're swapping the flimsy plastic exterior for something sturdier, styrofoam. I sliced it up into thin strips and then diced again into smaller rectangles. I'm cutting fast and loose here, not really measuring because I don't mind if the finished brick pattern isn't perfect. To further destroy any semblance of regularity with the bricks, I threw them in this plastic bag with rough, sharp, hard items. Basically, I'm simulating a white-collar prison here, a bunch of white squares with some loose screws thrown into a confined space and shaken vigorously. After that forced fraternization, the pieces emerged with character. Before bricklaying, I quickly removed a space for the door and windows. And then I threw on some Commodores and got to making that funky brick house. The idea here is something with a steampunk kind of vibe, but with a touch of overgrowth, but also cozy and zen-like. If you can imagine a place where Willy Wonka and Bigfoot might discuss the art of bonsai over a cup of horchata, I'm building that exact place. To simulate mortar, I mix some paint, baking soda, and Mod Podge. Paint to act as a primer, Mod Podge to help strengthen everything, and baking soda for just a touch of crunchy texture. Because I haven't learned my lesson with LED lights and wiring, I foolishly decided once again to illuminate my creation. Mistake number 1 was using these cheap LED tea lights, but don't get too attached because they didn't get too well attached, which is why the wiring never worked, and in a few more steps you'll see me abandon them altogether in favor of something else. It was at this point that I also realized mistake number 1 was actually mistake number 2, because the mistake number 1 slot went to those bricks for being too spaced out, resulting in big gaps that I had to come back and bridge with modeling paste. And here are some clips of pointless wiring and soldering that didn't matter after the LEDs broke.
You lose! Good day, sir!
To mount the lights, which I drilled holes for on either side of the door, I used the tip of these children's markers. Pens, markers, and mechanical pencils are quickly becoming a favorite building supply of mine. They're just so darn versatile. I had some leftover pieces from my pod racer build, like these cool little lighter triggers that made great lantern covers. Again, keep in mind that a lot of this lighting stuff will get redone in just a few minutes, but most of the individual pieces do get recycled in one way or another. Here are some rivets added to the lanterns made from my leather hole punch, a returning technique from my previous build. Because at this point I was overdue for a stupid mistake, I decided to paint these lanterns by hand with acrylics. This was straying from my usual method of priming everything together once the construction step is complete. The problem here is that since these are lantern covers, meaning that there will be bright LEDs inside them, any irregularities in paint application will be very obvious. By the way, here's another mistake, a black wash. And yes, this is the same wash I attempted and failed at last time. I thought maybe it would play nicer with bricks than it did with a pod racer, but I was wrong and I hate this stuff. But none of those other mistakes compared to this one. After having trouble with the lights, I dismantled one and accidentally snapped off one of the LED prongs. I'll be honest with you, I almost gave up here. I was so annoyed at this dumpster fire of a trash build that I committed assault on battery and decided maybe Gilbert was destined to forever remain homeless on my shelf. But then I stopped being a drama queen and remembered I had LED string lights in my supplies cabinet. This ended up being a much better option all the way around, as it gave me more points of light to work with, allowing me to illuminate the windows and doorway, more sturdy wiring, and a much better battery pack, a huge upgrade from the lame ion lithiums that came with the cheap tea lights. Of course, a new challenge that this presented was hiding the battery pack, which houses 2 AA batteries and is as conspicuous as it is awkward looking. So I gave it the old kit bash magic, gluing on springs, toy bits, computer bits, and even bendy straws from a juice box. Next, out of spite, I sawed up all those aggravating LED tea light housings. One way or another, they were going to become part of this build. Lighting flickered outside my windows as I cackled maniacally. Of course, it sure wouldn't be a steampunk building without brass pipes. These pipes are made from copper wiring, and the joints are spoofed with tiny strips of electrical tape. Like most things steampunk, these are about as pointless as a joke without a... It was now time to embark on a new series of mistakes. These popsicle sticks make great planks, but first they need some texture. I achieved this by scratching them vigorously with a pushpin. The wooden planks were used to make a front porch. Instead of trimming the edge of the planks that butt against the structure like a normal and smart person, I cut the outside edge, which resulted in a weird grass skirt effect that instantly looked more tribal village hut than steampunk workshop. And I don't. But hey, when life gives you lemons, you make little wooden wedges to fill the gaps left by the popsicle stick so that any splinters or cuts you get are extra painful because of the lemon juice lingering on your hands. And here's me making a door. I felt like I was finally doing something right here, so I continued my criminally lacking woodworking skills on these windows, also fashioned from popsicle sticks. Next, I prepped the curtains that will hang inside the windows. I wet a piece of paper towel, draped it over this aluminum foil thing to give it some waviness, and then coated the whole thing in Mod Podge. And hey, how about another mistake? For the rooftop, I was faced with a bit of a predicament. Since I couldn't actually build a normal roof, I had to just build a skirt thing that would go around the circumference of the pot so that I could then lay my shingles on top of that. The problem is that circles are evil and almost impossible to fashion by hand, so what I ended up with was this drunken hula hoop. Using wire, I made some metal braces to attach the skirt to, then attempted to build another perfect circle with a smaller diameter. If you're thinking this looks acceptable, you're wrong. From literally any other angle, this is complete garbage and would result in a roofline that only Tim Burton could love. After some thought, I simplified the whole design, opting for a semicircle and only one ring. To assure that my roof slope would be even, I glued down pieces of cardstock, then gave my roof shingles. The crushing weight of my disappointments left me in want of therapy, which I received from this oddly calming process of cutting out tiny rectangles from this cardstock packaging, then gluing them one by one onto the roof. I next decided to work on the window dressings, which I thought should be roughshod little shutters made from popsicle sticks. For detail, I added thin strips of cardstock which will eventually look like metal crossbeams and tiny loops of electrical wire as makeshift window handles. I put them in the window holes and could sense myself getting closer and closer to the painting stage, which is always exciting. I feel like with these scratch building projects, that's when the project suddenly springs to life. Before that, it's quite literally just a heap of junk, a slightly more organized landfill, but after priming, it becomes its own entity. And it's a super rewarding feeling. I felt like it was almost there at this point, but that front porch was still missing something. Of course, OSHA compliance. Let's avoid a lawsuit by adding some handrails out of pencils and wiring. I primed with an acrylic matte black applied by airbrush, then brushed on some other colors by hand, like this brown for the rooftops. This will serve as the undercoat for the copper roof shingles. I built up colors by layers here, first mixing a metallic copper with a light brown, then going full copper, with the direction of the brush strokes reversed, so as only to catch the edges of the shingles, making them look more naturally weathered. I dry brushed on some more copper and silver here and there just to get a mix of metallic effects, and then some finer detailing on the smaller metal bits. The wooden parts were painted in a similar way, with darker browns, reddish browns, then light browns, and even khaki lightly dry brushed layer by layer, giving the illusion of brown with depth. For the stones, I used a sponge to apply various dark and light grays, and even some greens for a subtle mossy effect. While we've got the paints out, let's hit that curtain with dark red. I chose red because I thought it might look nice complementing the dark green of Gilbert the plant once he finally comes home. With painting out of the way, the final step was adding flocking. I applied watered down glue with a paintbrush into the cracks and crevices between the bricks. These are places that would naturally acquire moisture and grow moss, so that's where I focus my sticky efforts before finally dusting everything with pinches of flocking. And that was it. I think it's time for the big reveal. Let's bring Gilbert in here, and... Well, in spite of a series of mistakes that nearly put this model in the trash, I'm going to call this latest scratch build a success. I want to take a moment to thank the 18 of you out there who've subbed to this channel. Thank you. I appreciate your support and viewership and hope you enjoyed this build as much as I did. Stay tuned for the next scratch model, which I've already begun collecting parts for. I won't go into details here, but we'll be returning to the realm of sci-fi with the next build, and I'm expecting it to be a lot more challenging than these last two. So I'll see you then. And until then, this is Gamey Builds. Over and out.
There's no earthly way of knowing
He's singing.
which direction we are going.